Well, Linda, hey, congratulations on your new film, The Rest of Us.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Hey, not a problem, not a problem. So tell us where the original idea, what sparked you to write the story for The Rest of Us?
So I work with young people at NYU, and it became obvious to me that in our representations related to mental health, that oftentimes we neglected certain at-risk populations, students of color, for example. And so I wanted, in a kind of popular media approach, to address this issue in a compelling way that I thought would be relevant to young people.
Absolutely, which is a very touching subject, you know, for a lot of people. When did you come to the decision to make it as a narrative?
Yeah, so that was a tough one. I had made a documentary film about students at NYU that had created a theater production, and I had done that over many, many years. And that film debuted at Tribeca. It was a short, and it told the story, the inspiring story of actors and filmmakers who came together to create this theater production for literally thousands of frosh who were coming on campus. And it's a really important piece of work that happens every year, theater work. And it's sometimes at Madison Square Garden, it's at huge venues, but it felt like I wanted to try and connect in a way that told a story that only a narrative could do. And that was really the story of The Rest of Us, those students who are left behind when a suicide happens on a college campus.
Yeah. Now, I found it interesting that you made the backdrop to be at 2001 with 9/11, which is exactly almost 20 years ago. That's quite an interesting choice. Why that time period was perfect as a backdrop for this film?
Yeah, I wanted to try and capture the dimensionality of what people deal with when there's a mental health issue. And oftentimes it is not only a personal issue, it's not only a family issue, it's not only the complexity of what might be going on in terms of one's own personal financial circumstances, but becomes a world issue. And 9/11 was the big event for me in my life. And my son was 5 years old on the day. We lived 3 blocks from the World Trade Center. And so it has been a compelling element in my own life. And I saw the ways in which it influenced my son and his friends. And so I wanted to capture this much larger story and the ways in which it might be influencing mental health. Little did I know that COVID would simply replace that. 9/11 doesn't replace it, of course, because 9/11 is still in our history, but is the kind of new version of that giant story and its influence.
Do you, when younger people watch this film, do you think it's as relatable to them? Because, the next generation could barely remember 9/11. They'll remember COVID, obviously, the pandemic year. But is that kind of like in the back of your mind when sometimes, because mental health now these days, it seems to be much, even though it's with every generation, but it's now more prominent towards younger people.
Yeah. So on the one hand, I think I wanted to remind people of the significance of 9/11 and its particular influence, for example, on the development of young people, and particularly Muslim young people at the time. So I think I wanted to tell that story, and I do think that that's obviously a very, very much a living story. But I think with COVID present, that actually it does elevate the 9/11 dimension of it so that people can identify with the idea that there's this larger force that we can't quite put our finger on. In this case, we're calling it COVID, but there are always these larger forces that influence the ways in which people's mental health is impacted.
your story is compelling because it's not quite about, you know, the people who go through the mental health, but it's about the people afterwards. Could you talk more about that, on how, you know, people's decisions after suicide affects the mental health of everybody else?
Yeah. So that was really the story I was trying to capture, and that was why a narrative feature was so necessary, because I wanted to talk about what we call the rest of us, those who are left behind, in large part because oftentimes in the moment after a suicide, you're focused on the person who committed suicide. And sometimes we don't remember that the biggest influence and the impact is on those who are left behind, and that they need our attention. What we also often don't pay enough attention to is the fact that those people who are left behind now become vulnerable to suicide. That is the contagion effect of suicide, or can be. And we have to pay very close attention to those who might be impacted by suicide in a way that makes them vulnerable to suicide. So people are thinking about, how do we celebrate the life of somebody who's committed suicide without thinking about those who are left behind might now become vulnerable as a result of the fact that somebody took their life. And it's really important that we stay focused on those who are living and those who are left behind and the rest of us.
How do people spot these signs? Because obviously people have different ways to mourn after a tragedy.
Yeah. Well, you have to pay attention. And that's a whole other message, I think, of the film, which is we're not taught really to pay attention. And I don't mean in the mental health sense that all of a sudden you have to become the therapist to your friend. All I mean is that we now can be allies, peer supporters to friends and to colleagues in this time of need, to be able to pay attention when somebody's hurting. And we can see when people are hurting and then help them reach out to get the help they need. But we have to be both willing to watch and see, pay attention, and then figure out how to make that connection. Not take the whole thing on, but really help people make the connection to getting the help they might need.
Great. And how was the experience of directing your first narrative film? It must have been a sort of a right turn from a documentary, that's for certain.
Yeah, I mean, on the one hand, I loved every minute of it. On the other hand, you know, every minute is a source of tremendous stress and pressure, especially a low budget film where you have only a few weeks to film. It was over 100 degrees on set, and the air conditioning was fairly non-functional, I think is the best way of putting it. And so it was amazing how the actors pitched in to be part of this larger story and this important story. All that is to say that I completely loved the experience of working with actors. They were so enthralled with the story and felt compelled to tell it in the best possible and most compelling way. So there was a way in which you could mold the story so differently and so responsively to a larger narrative that you were seeking to tell.
Tell us about your cast. Where did you recruit most of your cast? Were they from campus, or you actually got like actors from all over the place?
Yeah, so it was from all over the place. Of course, some much more experienced actors, others less experienced. Some from NYU, graduates of NYU. So it was a real mix. Cal, for example, is somebody I worked with for many, many years. He is now the director of the theater production we do at NYU for the Frosh first-year students. And so they came from everywhere, and we wanted we wanted a couple of really seasoned actors, which you see in the parents, amazing parent representation. And then younger actors who were just cutting their teeth on the industry. And it just felt like such a wonderful mix, and everybody was so supportive of each other. It was a beautiful thing to witness and be a part of.
Where did you serve as the backdrop for this campus for your film?
Yeah, so it was upstate New York on the equivalent of a campus. And the other place was, we used a little bit of time at Bard. So we were in upstate New York, and it was part of a Stockade Works early production. They work upstate now, and they're trying to cultivate a whole film production system and supportive of people who want to make films upstate. And it was really a terrific experience.
That is great. I figured the most challenging thing, which I find laughable because I'm part of that generation of is you trying to find all those cell phones you to use.
So sourcing those cell phones was such a hoot, and you had to be really, there weren't that many. We literally bought them online. I love that you're asking this question. We bought them online, and we'd get them, and we'd have to make sure that they were the right year, or at least within the right year. I mean, it was really a hoot. And we worked very closely with a professor at NYU who was an expert in technology around the turn of the century, because that was obviously crucially important that we get that right.
No, I think it's hilarious because I recognize some of those cell phones, and I was like, wow, this is pretty accurate in its own way. It's terrific.
Good. Good.
Well, let's talk about the most important messaging out of this film. Obviously, you put the message of a mental health hotline. I think at the end, and I think you also put a message at the beginning. Could you talk more about that?
Yeah, sure. So I think what we've learned over the course of many years, and there have been less responsible forms of media content related to mental health and more responsible forms. And one of the key elements is to actually warn people that you're going to see difficult material. And if you aren't comfortable watching that, or you're nervous about watching that, please watch that with a friend. And at the end, if you're feeling vulnerable, please make sure that you reach out to get help. So that's absolutely essential. But the editing, the shooting, every aspect of the film took into account what are the best practices in making films related to mental health and suicide prevention. So we were as careful as one can be, still showing the material in a way that is compelling to young people to get the help they need, to tap into their resilience, and at the same time to address in a responsible way the content.
Absolutely, it's a terrific message, and people should be more aware of this. Great. And Linda, after one more thing, after our this is under the belt, and it premiered right on time for Mental Health Awareness Month. What's next for you? Are you back to documentaries, or you want to tackle another narrative?
Such a great question. I do want to tackle another narrative. As a director friend of mine said, for narratives, there's a big, huge gap, probably 5 to 10 years, for in between each narrative film. You have to write the script, you have to get that right, you have to, all the things that are involved in a narrative, as opposed to a doc where you can go out and get the story, right? So we have one doc right now that we're in the process of finalizing. I have a very short film, which really I call as my son's film, called No Plan A in Tribeca, and right this minute in their virtual film festival. 12 minutes. It's about the story of our family driving across the country to see my father, my son's grandfather, who was undergoing cancer treatment in the middle of COVID. It's a happy and touching story, an important story during this difficult time. So, and we're just finishing a narrative script, and let's keep our fingers crossed we can make that happen as well.
Most excellent. For a moment, I thought you were going to do a follow-up film with the backdrop of the pandemic year or something like that.
Oh, please. No, but I am available for these kinds of interviews in order to advance this important mental health message. So thank you.
Hey, not a problem. Hey, thank you very much, Linda, for speaking with us. It's a very, how can you say, important film that a lot of people should actually watch and be aware of. Thank you very much for carrying this conversation with us.
And thank you so much for elevating the conversation. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Not a problem. Next time, Linda.
Take care.